I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine, if you will, a piece of land. It's vast, it's muddy, and it smells. It smells of manure, of damp earth, of rusting metal, and of rot. A sweet, cloying rot that hangs in the heavy Pacific air.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a farm in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization. This is 953 Dominion Avenue in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. We are talking about a location that sits just 27 kilometers east of Vancouver.
That's right. And it's that geography that makes this story so incredibly jarring. You have the shadow of a gleaming cosmopolitan, major city glass towers, ocean views, five-star sushi restaurants, some of the most expensive real estate in North America.
Right.
And then, less than a half-hour drive away, you have this squalid, chaotic pig farm that became the epicenter of a nightmare.
We are diving deep today into the story of Robert William Pickton. And I know, you've probably seen the headlines, you know the name. He's the pig farmer killer.
Mm-hmm.
He is one of, if not the most notorious serial killer in Canadian history. The numbers alone are they're enough to make your stomach turn. He was convicted of 6 murders. He was charged with 27. But, and here's where it gets truly chilling. He confessed to 49.
And he didn't just confess to 49. He explicitly stated, that he wanted to make it an even 50. He viewed it as a quota he failed to meet. It's just incredible.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a project he didn't finish. But today, our mission isn't just to recount the gore. We aren't here to just read a list of crimes or, turn this into a horror movie script. We want to understand how. How does a man kill that many women over that many years while operating a farm that was, it was frequently visited by the public, by biker gangs, and even by the police?
That is the central question. This isn't just a biography of a monster. It is a case study in systemic failure. It's about missed opportunities. It's about legal loopholes and a society that decided certain victims, specifically women from Vancouver's downtown Eastside, were, for all intents and purposes, invisible.
Yeah.
We need to unpack the forensic nightmare of that farm, the complex legal conclusion that left so many families feeling cheated, and really the background that created Robert Pickton in the first place.
We are pulling all of this from a stack of legal records, inquiry reports, and detailed biographical entries. We're going to walk through his life, the investigation, the trial, and his eventual death in prison just recently in 2024. So buckle up. This is going to be a heavy one, but it's a story that demands to be understood.
Let's start at the beginning, because monsters aren't usually born, they're made, or at least they're cultivated in specific soil.
Robert William Pickton was born in October 1949. His parents were Leonard and Louise. And by all accounts, this was not a happy home. The farm environment itself was just harsh. But it seems like the mother, Louise, was the dominant force here, right?
Oh, very much so. The sources paint a picture of a woman who was incredibly demanding. She was the iron hand of that farm. She prioritized the livestock over her own children, and I don't mean that metaphorically.
No.
We have reports that she would force Robert and his brother David to work these long hours in the muck, and she simply didn't care about their personal hygiene. They were tools for the farm, first and foremost.
This is where we get that detail that kind of sticks with you, the kind of detail that defines a childhood. Pickton and his brother would be sent to school literally reeking of manure. They were dirty. And kids, being kids, were cruel.
Of course.
He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back of the class. He was the kid everyone avoided. He was nicknamed Stinky Piggy.
And that kind of isolation is so critical. If you are ostracized from your peer group from the moment you enter the school system, you retreat. You stop socializing normally.
Yeah.
You don't learn the nuances of human interaction, of empathy, of friendship. You bond with the only things that accept you.
Which in his case was the animals.
In Pickton's case, that was the animals. But even that bond was betrayed.
This is the story about the calf, isn't it? This feels like a major psychological turning point.
Yes. This is what psychologists might call the pivot point. When Pickton was 12 years old, he started raising a calf. He loved this thing. It was a pet. He bottle-fed it. He spent his time with it. It was likely the only living creature that he felt a genuine reciprocal connection with.
Right, a real bond.
He took care of it for 2 weeks. Then he comes home from school one day, goes to the barn to find his friend, and it's gone. His parents had slaughtered it.
That is devastating for a 12-year-old. Just absolutely brutal.
It is. He was distraught. But if you look at it through the lens of his future crimes, it teaches a brutal foundational lesson. Emotional attachment is dangerous. It gets you hurt.
And it teaches you something else too, right?
It teaches you that living things, things that breathe and look at you, are ultimately just meat. It desensitizes you to death. It just completely blurs the line between a living being and a commodity. I mean, if the thing you love most can be turned into dinner by your own parents, what value does a stranger have?
That's a terrifying perspective. So, okay, he's isolated, he's traumatized, he drops out of school in 1963, he's essentially functionally illiterate or close to it, and he goes to work as a meat cutter.
A skill set that becomes horrific later on. He learns how to dismantle a body. He learns the anatomy of muscle and bone. He's literally training for his future crimes without even knowing it.
Right. So he does that for about 7 years, then goes back to the farm full time. Now let's fast forward to the late 70s. His parents pass away, and suddenly Stinky Piggy and his brother are sitting on a gold mine.
The real estate boom. This is the irony of the location we talked about. They inherited the farm, and as Vancouver expanded, that land became incredibly valuable. They sold off parts of it to developers for townhouses and subdivisions.
And they made a fortune.
They made about 5.16 million Canadian dollars. So these aren't poor, struggling farmers scratching a living from the dirt anymore. They are wealthy, land-rich eccentrics.
And this is where the story takes a turn toward the surreal. They didn't just quietly farm pigs and count their money. They decided to turn a slaughterhouse on the property into an ad hoc nightclub.
Piggy's Palace.
It sounds like a bad joke, doesn't it? But it was real. They actually converted a literal slaughterhouse into a venue. They threw these huge rave-style parties.
We're talking events attracting up to 2,000 people. You had members of the Hells Angels, you had local business figures, you had people from the city coming out to this farm to party in a converted slaughterhouse.
The imagery is just, it's insane.
The irony is almost too much to handle. You have this intersection of, high society and low society, of legal and illegal, all happening on a property soaked in blood. And in 1996, they even registered a nonprofit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Time Society.
A charity? You're kidding me.
A registered nonprofit. They claimed they were organizing events for worthy groups, raising money for charity.
But the reality was what?
The reality was unregulated raves. It was a tax dodge and a way to legitimize the chaos. In fact, the only reason they got in trouble initially wasn't because of violence or anything sinister. It was zoning violations.
Right. Bureaucracy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The city of Port Coquitlam sued them because, legally speaking, you can't hold a rave in a slaughterhouse on agricultural land. They were flouting the rules, holding these massive New Year's Eve parties, and eventually the charity status was stripped because they couldn't produce any financial statements.
So the government was watching them, but for all the wrong reasons.
Precisely. They were on the radar for taxes and zoning, not for murder.
But while the music is playing and the bikers were drinking at Piggy's Palace, something much darker was already happening in the background. And this brings us to what you've called the critical missed opportunity.
This is the moment where history could have been different. If you were listening to this and asking, why wasn't he stopped? This is the year you need to look at. 1997.
March 23rd, 1997. Pickton is 47 years old. A woman named Wendy Lynn Eistetter is at the farm. She's a sex worker Pickton had picked up in Vancouver.
And an altercation occurs. A violent one. Eistetter told police that Pickton handcuffed her. He pulled a knife. He stabbed her. But Wendy Lynn Eistetter was a fighter.
She was.
She managed to disarm him. She took his own knife and stabbed him with it. She fought for her life.
That is incredible. She saved her own life.
She did. They both ended up in the hospital. Pickton went to Eagle Ridge Hospital. She went to a nearby emergency room, and the police got involved. This wasn't a secret. Pickton was charged with attempted murder.
Okay, so let's pause and look at the board here. We have a woman with stab wounds. We have handcuffs dangling from her wrist, and a stabbing victim who is also the perpetrator in the hospital. This seems like an open and shut case to get this guy off the streets. He was charged.
He was. He was released on a $2,000 bond, but he was facing serious time. I mean, attempted murder is a major charge, but then in January 1998, the charges were stayed.
They were dropped.
They were dropped.
Why? How on earth does that happen?
Because Wendy Lynn Eistetter struggled with drug addiction. The prosecutors looked at her and decided that she was too unstable to secure a conviction. They didn't think a jury would believe her, or they didn't think she could hold up on the stand under a tough cross-examination.
So they didn't think she was a credible witness.
They looked at her history, her lifestyle, and they decided she wasn't a credible witness. They thought Pickton's lawyer would tear her apart and he'd walk anyway, so they just dropped it.
So because she was an addict, they let a man who handcuffed and stabbed her walk free.
Precisely. And this is the systemic bias we talked about. The legal system looked at the perfect victim profile, saw that Eisteddter didn't fit it, and decided it wasn't worth the risk of a trial. And just think about the timeline. This is early 1998, Pickton's most active period of killing. The time when the vast majority of women disappeared was between the late 90s and 2001.
That is just heartbreaking. If they had prosecuted him in 1997, even if he got a few years,
Yeah.
a plea deal, anything.
Dozens of women might still be alive. It is the single most tragic what if in this entire case. And just to add a layer of forensic frustration to this,
Oh, there's more.
when they arrested him in 1997, after that attack, they seized the clothes and the rubber boots he was wearing. They put them in an RCMP storage locker. Standard procedure.
And they just sat there.
They sat there for years. In 2004, when the full investigation was finally underway, they went back and tested those items. They found the DNA of two later victims, Andrea Borhaven and Kara Ellis, on those boots and clothes.
Wait. Unpack that timeline for me. The DNA of victims was on the clothes he wore during the 1997 attack.
Well, let's look at the dates. Borhaven was last seen in March 1997. Ellis was reported missing in January 1997. So these women were likely already dead or had been attacked right around the same time as the Eisteddter incident.
So the evidence linking him to at least 2 murders was literally in the police's possession. It was in a box in an evidence locker.
It was right there. But because they dropped the Eisteddter case, nobody ever looked at it. The file was closed. The evidence was forgotten.
That is infuriating. It really highlights how the system failed on every single level. The evidence was right there. So, okay, Pickton is free. He's back at the farm. And the disappearances start ramping up.
We are moving into the late 90s now. Women are vanishing from the downtown east side of Vancouver. Now, for listeners who don't know the DTES, or downtown east side, it's a very specific neighborhood. It has historically struggled with high poverty, high rates of drug use, and a large population of sex workers.
It's a vulnerable community.
A deeply vulnerable community, often described as one of the poorest postal codes in the country. A place where people can fall through the cracks very easily.
And rumors started flying, didn't they? The women on the street, they knew something was wrong.
They always know first. The community on the street talks. There was talk of a serial killer. There was talk of a pig farm. There was talk of a man named Willie. But the police were incredibly slow to connect the dots.
Why, though? Were they just not listening?
They treated these as individual runaway cases. Or they assumed the women had just moved on or gone back home to their families or maybe overdosed somewhere and hadn't been found yet. There was this prevailing attitude that this was just the lifestyle.
That this was normal for those people.
That's the ugly truth of it, yes. But there were tips. It's not like no one was saying anything to the authorities.
No, this wasn't just vague rumor.
Not at all. An employee at the farm actually found purses belonging to missing women and reported it.
Purses. That's a trophy. And the police did what?
They conducted searches, but initially found no evidence. They'd go out, look around, Pickton would give them some story, and they'd leave. Then, in 1999, they received a tip that Pickton had a freezer full of human flesh.
A freezer full of human flesh. That is not a subtle tip. That is a neon sign flashing murder.
It was ignored, or at least not acted upon with the urgency it required. They interviewed him again, they looked around, but they didn't have that smoking gun or perhaps the will to tear the place apart.
And he was good at playing dumb, wasn't he?
He was. Remember Stinky Piggy? He leaned into that persona. He played the dumb farmer card very well. He acted like this simpleton who wouldn't hurt a fly, just a guy trying to run a farm and help people out. And it seems the police bought it.
So how did it finally break? Because eventually they did catch him, but my understanding is that it wasn't a brilliant homicide detective finally cracking the code. It wasn't some Sherlock Holmes moment.
No. It was a fluke. Or rather, it was a completely different department looking for something else entirely. February 6, 2002. The police execute a search warrant at the Pickton property.
Okay.
But they aren't looking for bodies. They are looking for illegal firearms.
Guns, of course.
Exactly. They had reliable info on illegal weapons. So the tactical team goes in. And while you're searching for guns, they start seeing things in plain sight. Personal items, IDs, inhalers, things that belong to the women who had been reported missing, whose faces were in the news.
It's almost like the universe finally forced their hand. They trip over the evidence while looking for something else.
They did. This triggered a second warrant, this time for the BC missing women investigation. They sealed off the farm. Pickton was arrested initially on the weapons charges, then released under surveillance, and then rearrested on February 22, 2002, charged with 2 counts of murder.
And that opened the floodgates.
It began what became the largest, most complex, and most expensive crime scene investigation in Canadian history.
I want to talk about the scale of this excavation, because when you say search the farm, people might picture a few cops with shovels and maybe a sniffer dog. That is not what happened here.
No, this was an industrial operation, a forensic archaeology dig, basically. The cost ran to about 70 million Canadian dollars by the end of 2003.
70 million.
Yeah. They had to bring in forensic anthropologists, heavy equipment, and essentially dismantle the entire property. They took the farm apart piece by piece, soil by soil.
They used conveyor belts, right? I remember seeing pictures of that.
Two 50-foot conveyor belts. They were running soil sifters 24/7. They were literally sifting the earth of the farm, bucket by bucket, looking for bone fragments, teeth, jewelry, anything that could identify a victim. They demolished the buildings, the property was fenced off, and became this grim fortress of forensic science.
And the reason they had to go to such lengths is because of the nature of the remains. We aren't talking about intact bodies buried in shallow graves where you can just dig them up.
This is the darkest part of the deep dive,
Yeah.
and listeners need to be prepared for this. The bodies were rarely intact. They were dismembered, they were decomposed, they had been ravaged by insects, and horrific as it is to say, they had been eaten by the pigs.
He used the animals.
He used the farm animals as a method of disposal. It's an ancient, brutal way to get rid of a body.
There was a public health warning issued about this, wasn't there? This became a whole other level of horror for the public.
Yes. In March 2004, the revelation came out. The government warned that Pickton may have ground up human remains and mixed them with the pork he sold to the public.
He sold the meat to people.
He had friends, he had parties at Piggy's palace, he sometimes distributed meat to neighbors or associates. The province's health authority had to issue a warning that human remains might have entered the food supply.
My God.
Just think about the psychological impact of that on the community. It's the stuff of nightmares. But it was real life in British Columbia. People had to wonder if they had unknowingly participated in cannibalism. It's a level of violation that is hard to even comprehend.
It's absolute grotesquerie. It really shows the level of depravity we are dealing with. And inside his trailer, the specific items they found, it paints a picture of a man who was deeply, deeply disturbed.
It's a chaotic collection of violence and bizarre fetish items. They found a loaded .22 revolver. But on the barrel, he had attached a dildo.
Oh, dildo.
He claimed it was a makeshift silencer.
That always won't work.
No. Experts, of course, said that's impossible. It wouldn't work at all. The gas expansion would just blow it apart. But the imagery, the sexual object, combined with the lethal weapon, it speaks volumes about his pathology. It merges sex and death in a very literal, visual way.
What else?
Night vision goggles, 2 pairs of faux fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe containing blue liquid,
Booze liquid. What was that?
windshield washer fluid. And there was a video linked to the investigation where a friend of Pickton's discussed killing addicts by injecting them with washer fluid. It's a cruel, painful way to die. It causes kidney failure, blindness, agonizing pain.
So this was a murder weapon in waiting.
It seems so. And there was Spanish fly, which is a supposed aphrodisiac. The whole trailer was just a toolkit for predation.
Exactly. He was equipped to hunt, to trap, and to kill. It wasn't accidental. It was prepared. So they have the farm, they have the DNA coming in from the sifting, they have the weapons, but they need him to talk. And Pickton, despite playing the fool, was cagey. How did they get the confession?
They used a classic technique, the cellmate stratagem. In Canada, this is often associated with Mr. Big Stings, but here it was a more direct cell plant. They placed Pickton in a cell with an undercover RCMP officer posing as another detainee.
The old, I'm a criminal too, you can trust me routine.
And it worked perfectly. Pickton started talking. He wanted to impress this fellow criminal. He started bragging. He confessed to 49 murders.
49.
49. And the detail that chills everyone to the bone, the one that everyone remembers from this case.
Yeah.
He told the undercover officer that he wanted to make it an even 50. He said he got sloppy at the end.
Sloppy.
He felt that because he was caught, he had failed his goal. Not that he felt guilt, not that he was sorry for the lives he took, but that he was inefficient. He was aiming for a round number, a milestone. It shows a complete and total lack of humanity.
That brings us to the charges. With a confession of 49, you'd expect 49 charges. But that's not how it went down, is it?
No, not at all. The Crown eventually laid 27 charges of first-degree murder. The victims fit a profile, sex workers, many of them Indigenous women. But the legal process is slow and complex. They couldn't try all 27 at once.
Why not? I mean, if he killed them, try him for them. It seems straightforward to a layperson.
It's about logistics and the jury. The trial judge, Justice James Williams, made a very controversial decision. He severed the charges, he divided them into one group of 6 and another group of 20.
So they would have 2 separate trials.
That was the plan. The logic was that trying 27 murders in one go would take years. It would completely overwhelm the jury. There's a legal concept called cognitive load.
Right.
The evidence would be so voluminous that it might lead to a mistrial or a hung jury because the jurors simply couldn't keep track of the details of 27 separate cases, 27 different sets of forensic evidence. So they picked 6 cases that they felt were the strongest, the most representative, to proceed with first.
Who were the 6? I think it's important we say their names.
Serena Abbotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Wolfe, Georgina Pepin, and Marnie Frey. These were the women whose cases went to court in 2006.
So the trial happens, the jury hears about the wood chipper, the pig rendering, the DNA, they hear that taped confession, and in December 2007, they come back with a verdict. And it wasn't exactly what people expected.
No, they found him not guilty of first-degree murder.
Wait, unpack that. Not guilty of first degree, after all of that.
But guilty of second-degree murder on all 6 counts.
Okay, so what's the difference here for the listener, legally speaking?
First degree implies premeditation and planning for the specific act of murder, so planning and deliberate. Second degree is still intentional murder, but the jury perhaps wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that every single act was pre-planned to the degree the law requires for first degree.
Or maybe something else.
Or, and this is a theory legal scholars discuss, they might have believed he had help. If he was an accomplice, or if the specific mechanics of the killing were unclear, they might have landed on second degree as the safer conviction to ensure he didn't walk free on a technicality.
But the sentence, what did that mean for his prison time?
The sentence was effectively the same. Life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. That is the maximum penalty under Canadian law for murder, whether it's first or second degree. So in terms of time served, it didn't matter. He was going away forever.
But it mattered to the families, and it mattered a great deal for their other 20 charges.
Huge implications. Because he was now serving the maximum sentence, the Crown made a decision in 2010. They stayed the remaining 20 charges.
They just dropped them after all that.
Essentially. Their reasoning was pragmatic, if cold. He is already in prison for life. A second trial would cost millions of dollars, drag on for another year or more, and even if he was convicted on all 20 counts, he couldn't serve any more time. You can't serve consecutive life sentences in Canada in a way that extends the parole ineligibility indefinitely beyond a certain point.
I can just hear the listeners right now screaming at their speakers. What about justice for those 20 families?
That was exactly the reaction. It was very mixed. Some families were relieved they didn't have to sit through a gruesome trial and hear how their daughters were butchered, but many others felt denied. They felt their loved ones became a footnote.
They didn't get their day in court?
They didn't get their day in court. They didn't get a verdict for their specific daughter or sister. It reinforced that feeling that these women, even in death, didn't matter as much to the system.
Precisely. And that brings us to the aftermath. Because you can't have a disaster of this magnitude, a failure this complete, without someone eventually saying sorry.
Right, the police apology. In 2010, Vancouver Police Deputy Chief Doug Leppard issued an apology. It was surprisingly candid for a police statement. He said, "I wish we would have caught him sooner. I would say to the families how sorry we all are, because we did not catch this monster sooner."
It's a powerful quote, admitting that they failed to catch a monster. But words are wind, as they say. We needed an inquiry to really dig into the why.
And we got one. The Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, led by a former judge, Wally Opal. This is established to answer the question we started with, how? How did this happen?
And what did Opal find? Was it just incompetence?
He confirmed what everyone in the downtown Eastside already knew. It wasn't just incompetence. There was a distinct systemic police bias. He found that the police failed to pursue the case despite overwhelming evidence because of who the victims were.
Drug addicts, sex workers, Indigenous women.
Yes. The lesser dead, as criminologists sometimes call
A
it.
horrible term.
A horrible but accurate term for how they were treated. The inquiry highlighted that these crimes were treated as low priority. If women were disappearing from a wealthy suburb like West Vancouver, or if university students were vanishing, the response would have been instantaneous and massive. But because it was the DTES, it was slow, it was disjointed, it was prejudiced.
There were civil lawsuits too, right? The children of the victims sued?
They did. They sued the police and the Crown for negligence. They settled in 2014. Each child received 50,000 Canadian dollars.
$50,000 for the loss of a mother and the systemic failure to protect her.
It feels like a token amount. It acknowledges the wrong, but it hardly compensates for the loss. It's a bureaucratic apology written on a check.
So Pickton is in prison. He's serving his life sentence. He's the pig farmer killer in the history books. But the story didn't end in 2010. It actually had a very recent and very violent conclusion.
Yes, we have to fast forward to 2024, February 2024 specifically. Robert Pickton became eligible for day parole.
That must have been terrifying for the families, just seeing that in the news.
It caused immense distress. Now, it's important to note, eligible doesn't mean getting out. Given his crimes, no parole board in the country would have released him. No hearing was even scheduled. He likely never would have seen the light of day. But just the fact that the date arrived on the calendar was a re-traumatization. It reminded everyone that he was still there, still breathing.
But he didn't make it much past that date.
No. In May 2024, Pickton was at the Port Coquitlam institution in Quebec, a maximum security prison. He was attacked
By another inmate?
by another inmate, a man named Martin Charest, a man with a history of assaulting other prisoners. And the details of the attack are, well, they're grimly ironic in their brutality.
Yeah.
Charest used a broken broomstick handle. He shoved it into Pickton's face, specifically up his nose.
That is visceral, a very specific kind of violence.
It caused massive internal damage to his brain. Pickton was airlifted to a hospital, but he died on May 31st, 2024, from complications of the injury.
And the assailant, Charest, what happened to him?
He was charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded guilty. And his statement was simple. He said he did it for the victims.
A kind of vigilante justice ending to a saga of legal failures.
In a way, yes. It brings a definitive end to the life of Robert Pickton. There is a sense of finality now. He can no longer hurt anyone. But it doesn't close the wound of the systemic issues that let him get away with it for so long.
So let's wrap this up. We have 6 convictions, 27 charges, 49 confessed murders, a $70 million crime scene, a farm that became a graveyard, and a legacy that really helped fuel the missing and murdered Indigenous women movement in Canada.
That is the one positive legacy, if we can call it that. It forced Canada to look in the mirror. It forced the government and the public to acknowledge that there is a crisis of violence against Indigenous women that goes ignored. It started conversations that were long, long overdue.
I want to leave the listener with a thought. We talked about 1997. We talked about Wendy Lynn Eistetter. The charges were dropped because the witness was an addict. She was unstable.
If the system had listened to her, if they had valued her testimony despite her addiction, if they had seen her as a human being who was attacked, not just a label.
Pickton would have been behind bars before the vast majority of those 49 murders happened. The system chose to ignore a flawed witness, and in doing so, condemned dozens of women to the most horrible fate imaginable.
It's a harsh lesson. Credibility shouldn't be based on social standing, or your bank account, or whether you're sober. Truth is truth, regardless of who speaks it.
So here's the question for you to mull over as you go about your day. In today's world right now, who are the people whose disappearances might still go unnoticed? Who are the unstable witnesses we are ignoring today? Because history has a nasty habit of repeating itself if we don't watch the shadows.
It certainly does.
Yeah.
We have to keep watching.
Thank you for joining us on this difficult deep dive. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary.
Thank you. Stay safe out there.